Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Jeremy Champa. We're going to take a look today at the October 2020 grammar section. So let's get started. Okay, number one says, which choice most effectively sets up the sentence that follows in the paragraph? They seem to like to start with questions like this, and it's not great news for all of us because, of course, we have to do some reading outside of the sentence. A lot of times, other questions, we can read just the single sentence. In this case, we're going to have to read what follows below. So remember that anytime they give you a specific prompt, the key, I know this sounds self-explanatory, but the key is to pay the closest attention to the particulars of the question. Too often I have students say, well, I think this one just sounded better. Forget that. Just focus on what effectively sets up the sentence that follows. And we'll need some context above, so I'll read a little bit above anyways. Instrumental repairs. Millions of musicians around the world, from school groups to rock bands to professional symphony orchestras, practice, perform, and travel regularly. We have something that's going to go in the place of this underlined part, or we'll keep it, but the most important part is the next sentence. Guitars need new frets. Clarinets need rusty keys cleaned or replaced, and pianos need to be tuned. Pause right there. Okay, so we want to set up these specific examples of instruments needing specific repairs. So this idea of making arrangements for them to travel with them doesn't make any sense. Considerable wear and tear? Sure. We're talking about the ways in which the instruments break down and need to be repaired. C makes no sense because, again, introducing audiences and helping keep those who make busy. So, look, I don't mean to say that any other answer choice here is, a terrible choice. When I say it makes no sense when you focus on the specifics of the question, right? In this case, effectively setting up this sentence about the ways in which instruments get repaired. It's got to be the one about wear and tear. Okay, keep going. So next we have this question about, should we add a new sentence in between? Never start with yes or no. There's been times when yes or no ends up being more important to me than the because in the explanation, but I start with the explanation always. So it says, piano tuning became a profession at the start of the 19th century when the harpsichord was superseded by the modern piano. Now, look, we had a sentence above that talked about the way instruments need to be specifically repaired. And then the sentence below says something about comprehensive maintenance, which is exactly what we're talking about. Maintenance and repairs is what the previous sentence is talking about. This sentence about the beginning of piano tuning, which isn't necessarily repairs, though it is. Maybe it falls under the category of repairs in a subtle way. It doesn't seem great, but we still have to rely on the reasons. Don't let your presumptions about what comes above and below matter most. Focus on the reasons. So it introduces the historical information about musical instrument technology that expanded on later in the passage. Could be true. It develops an example of piano tuning in a way that sets up the discussion of specialties in the next paragraph. An example of piano tuning? Be careful. It talks about piano tuning, but I don't think this is an example of piano tuning. It just tells us when piano tuning began. I don't see an example, so B is out. It fails to address the development of the modern guitar and clarinet. This is a classic kind of answer choice that I've never seen end up as the correct answer. So if you can identify this answer choice, you're going to be in good shape. The mistake here is it doesn't matter if it doesn't address other instruments. Sometimes I could generalize this kind of answer choice as saying no because it doesn't do something else that we want it to do. Or, the classic statement, don't let the good be the enemy of the perfect. In other words, just because something isn't perfect doesn't mean it's not good. And so I don't care if it doesn't bring up the modern guitar and clarinet. That doesn't need to be brought up. That's not really a failure. So I don't like C. Now, this answer choice is going to be right in this case, D, tangential information about piano tuning that interrupts the paragraph's progression of ideas. Yes, because the progression of ideas is about specific instruments that need to be tuned, and then what follows is that we need good technicians that can do this work. Trained professionals, as it says, with an expert knowledge of both mechanics and music. So that answer choice is the best one. I crossed off 2 of them because they were factually inaccurate. B and C were factually inaccurate. A wasn't necessarily inaccurate. I would have to hunt down to see if there's later in the passage a discussion of instrument technology, the historical background or something. Perhaps. But this answer choice D is, I would say this kind of answer is right about half the time. So good bet that the answer is, don't add this sentence because it's kind of random. And that's the case here. Last thing I'll say, notice that I focused on what was said above and below, and I put the sentence above number 2 in my own words, and the sentence below number 2 I tried to process in my own words. I didn't do it explicitly. Having done that, I have a really strong sense of what's said in the sentences. Make the effort to not just read sentences, but to put them in your own words actively. Anytime you can do these steps actively, you're avoiding mistakes, most likely. You're avoiding a lack of comprehension that can come if you just sort of read it down and expect that you understand it. Active engagement. All right, number 3 is a word choice question, and this kind of thing doesn't matter quite as much. Number 3, the reason I say it doesn't matter quite as much is because there's not a way to study for this other than just to, read a bunch and, get a strong vocabulary. We're looking for significant repairs in this case. Look, conclusive, definite, potent, they're all related. Conclusive repairs would mean the final repair, however, and things break again. The definite repair, again, sort of suggests that it's sort of the one and only. Or sort of, think about the opposite, an indefinite repair. I guess that sort of would mean patchwork repair. That's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about for comprehensive maintenance, so for full maintenance, and for significant repairs. So, you could probably make a small repair yourself, but for comprehensive maintenance and significant repairs, you'll need a technician, right? The word potent means very strong, which is inaccurate here and inelegant. So not a lot you can do for the word choice questions, except to say sometimes, every once in a while, and I'll point these out if they come up on this test, sometimes the right answer stands out from the pack because it's more formal and there's 3 sort of informal answer choices. So if you saw like something that said significant versus like big time is going to be wrong. That's informal. You want the formal one typically. All right, number 4. So this is interesting. We haven't had any pure grammar questions yet. Number 4 asks us to combine the sentences at the underlined portion. Here's what I want you to know about this, and I'm just going to use my chalkboard for this for just a second. Semicolons are bad. Also, comma also is bad. And comma and. Usually, and I'm not saying every time, these are things that I like to avoid. Things that I like to use are colons. Oh, and add to the bad list words like being and extra INGs. These are the kind of things that you want to avoid on combining sentences questions. So these are bad. Colons are good. And really what you want, the reason colons are good, to elaborate on that a little bit, colons show a specific relationship. Colons can be replaced with language like such as or namely. And so that's a great way of connecting 2 sentences. It's not the only way, but what we want is a specific and meaningful connection. Here's the thing. You can use comma and or comma also to connect completely disparate ideas, right? I always bring up this example of this young 7-year-old I used to babysit in college who used to say, also, I could use a root beer. He would attach that to everything. So it goes to show you that that's not a meaningful connection between sentences. It's something you could always do in speech, and it's not that effective, though I did sometimes give him a root beer. Okay, look, the long dash is equivalent to a colon, too. I see that on answer choice A. So a long dash is key as well. That could work. Well, let's see. I'm seeing the originals. The other thing to say is that the original is always fine. It's just you don't have a choice to keep it. So becoming a musical instrument technician requires dedication. It requires dedication to learning the intricacies of the instrument. Now, see, that sounds a little bit redundant, however, even though it's kind of okay. It requires dedication. We already have something, the thing requires dedication in the previous sentence. Now, look, the redundancy of A, I don't like. That is, look, I love the long dash, but that is dedication is redundant again. It's kind of the same thing I didn't like about the original. This is the first time I can see that I really don't like the original. Most times they're perfectly fine. Requires dedication to learning the intricacies of instruments. Yeah, sure. Dedication to instruments' intricacies that can only be learned. So that's saying the same thing. And now this is tricky, man. Here's what I love about the test makers. I got to give them some credit. Over time, they realize the kind of things that people like me can teach, and then they make slight adjustments. I just told you INGs are typically wrong, but I'm liking B better than C here. I'm going to check out D. The instrument's intricacies can be learned by individuals who have dedicated themselves to that purpose. Look, in every case, the answer choices that are wrong are a little bit redundant here. This is kind of strange. Typically, redundancy questions are a slightly different kind of question. They won't have a prompt. They'll look like 5 or probably 6 where there's no prompts, or 7. This is a slight change, and we want to pay attention to when the test changes a little bit. This is, a fresh test, 2020. I'm recording this in January 2021. This is new, and I like B. B is the best answer. Dedication to instruments' intricacies that can only be learned. I mean, that's a weird way to end a sentence, right? So the most effective way is answer choice B, which has an ing, but it's also the simplest. So pay attention to that going forward. I think what you'll see on older tests is that INGs are typically incorrect. I know that's what you'll see. In this case, answer choice B is better because it's brief and effective, whereas that can only be learned. I want to know, what do you mean? Dedication to instruments' intricacies that can only be learned. I would expect to see a prepositional phrase after that. Only be learned by, dedication or something. So, yeah, I think that's... Oh, there is one other thing I might say here that could help us, which is 9 times out of 10, even going back to the oldest tests, you don't want to mix the language up unnecessarily. Rare is the case in which you'll do that. So what I'm noticing is it requires dedication to learning the intricacies of an instrument. That order in the original, learning intricacies, instruments, that's intact on answer choice B. So kind of a challenging question, but one thing I haven't mentioned yet today that is often the case is that, the first rule that you should keep in mind, or not rule, but strategy you should keep in mind on the grammar section is that simpler answers with less language and less punctuation are typically the best. So answer choice B is parsimonious with that idea. Number 5. Many technicians are a musician themselves. Okay, the problem with that is that we have a plural subject, many technicians. We have a plural verb, are musicians themselves. So all the answer choices are wrong for the same reason. Oneself, him or herself, a musician in answer choice A, those are all wrong. Answer choice B is wrong, like I said. So musicians themselves, answer choice C. Okay, cool. I did something there that I wouldn't advise later in the test, which is you should always read at the period, probably even at the beginning of the test, or at least to a definitive punctuation mark that ends an independent clause, such as in this case, a semicolon after engineering. But I was able to spot that right away anyways. Number 6 appears to have two elements. There's a word choice element, and then I guess you could call them both word choice elements, but the difference between then with an E in answer choice C and D, and than with an A in A and B, than is for comparisons. Then is for time, or logical statements. If something, then another something. If A, then B, for instance. Okay, so let's read this sentence and see what we have. Do we have a comparison? That's probably the easiest thing to ask ourselves. If an instrument is not performing to a musician's standards, a technician needs to be able to diagnose the problem and subsequently or after that advise. So then there's not a comparison. It's a time thing. First you diagnose, then you advise. So for that reason, it's got to be C or D, and you keep hearing me say advise instead of advice. Advise is the verb. You advise someone. It's an action. And advice is the noun. You give someone advice. In that sentence I just said, give is the verb. Advice is the object, or a noun. So that's the difference here. Best answer is C. Time plus verb, then advise. One thing to notice here is that the word and sets up, two things that the subject does. A technician needs to be able to diagnose and then advise. Right. So, all right, moving on. Number 7. Okay, these questions. Important strategy. I see a lot of folks, find these questions to be a little bit harder than some of the other ones. There's a lot to this approach, but what I want you to do is first recognize that the answer choices are about connecting sentences, right? This is at the beginning of a sentence, connecting the previous sentence to the current one. And the first thing to do is to categorize your answer choices. So I'm going to do that here. And I'll do it on the board just so you can see. Likewise is sort of like similar or similarly. Pardon my bad handwriting. For instance is an example. So I'll just write it in shorthand here. For instance is an example. In the first place, that sort of means like it's talking about order or time, the order of something. And then furthermore is sort of like continuing or additionally. And look, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to come up with the exact same words as me. All you're looking for is the function of these words. The function. So now that I have all those in mind, the reason I did that first is because I don't want to be swayed by the sound. You heard me say this before. Don't rely on the sound of something. Rely on the sort of, in this case, the functionality. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the above sentence, put it in my own words, read the sentence below, put it in my own words, and then I'm going to put my own connector in between or one of the ones that I've just come up with. But let's see. If an instrument is not performing, we just read the sentence. If the instrument, so I'll just paraphrase. If the instrument's not what the musician is expecting or looking for in terms of performance, the technician needs to be able to figure out what's going on and then fix it. A trumpet might not be functioning properly. So this is an example, right? So, for instance, is the best answer. A trumpet not functioning is an example of a problem, right? So that's why we would say, for instance. The biggest problem that people run into, I've found, I found this over, I don't know how many students I've taught, over 1,000. People pick A more often than anything else. And that's because answer choice A, the original, you'll read it and you'll think it sounds okay. So a quick example of this, like sometimes in communication lessons, or I worked in corporate America briefly, people will use language that feels nice to try to sort of subtly manipulate other people. So for instance, they'll use the word and when they really mean the word but. And the reason they'll do that, of course, is that and sounds nicer and but usually sounds like something bad is happening. So they'll say something positive. You've done a great job on this project, but I need it to be better. That sounds negative, right? So you can subtly manipulate somebody by saying, you did a great job on this project and I need you to do better, right? For a second, wires cross a little bit. And what happens is usually the person that's hearing that takes it as two positives instead of a positive and a negative. What's my point? My point is that when you read the original, you're likely to be manipulated into thinking that the original works just fine. You're likely to read that likewise, oh, that's fine, yeah, because we have, it's the same thing as this diagnosing, so it's likewise, right? So avoid that by taking a clinical approach like I did. Put the stuff in roughly your own words, the answer choices and the original sentences. Don't read the word that's in the original in number 7. That will be super helpful. Moving on to number 8, finally some punctuation. Punctuation rules are in some ways the best ones because you can easily beat these questions. Look, the rules are, I'll use the chalkboard for this again. Let's see, comma or has 2 options. So the original comma or, it can either be a list or 2 full sentences. Comma fanboys is, sort of the way I sometimes write it is independent clause, comma fanboys, independent clause. So the fanboys are for and nor, but, or, yet, so. So pardon my bad handwriting. Those are the 2 options for or. Now the thing is, I'm looking down at these answer choices and I'm seeing some other stuff that could create 2 full sentences. So for instance, B, answer choice B, this is A, B is a semicolon, which has to be I see, semicolon, I see. Answer choice C, so I see again means full sentence. C, I'm already very suspect of. It could happen. If that was going to happen, it would probably be on a later question. So it's slightly more complicated. We still have this comma or that we already have discussed, and then we have this extra comma here, which would only happen if we have like a set of parentheses here, like these 2 commas working like parentheses, a parenthetical phrase. So I don't really like that one. If it were number 40, when things get a little bit weird, that could happen. The long dash is kind of interesting. It's worth mastering this too. A long dash, like I said, is equal to a colon. What you need for a long dash is you need a full sentence at the beginning and then whatever you want after. So it's less restrictive than a semicolon. It's more flexible. So let's just see what's going on here. Now, you have to make sure that you find the full sentence. A trumpet might not be functioning properly because the valves have become sticky. The joints have developed air leaks. This is a list. Or the metal parts have been dented. So because it's a list, we're going to go with answer choice A. We have 3 items that are showing, 3 different ways in which a trumpet may function improperly. So, answer choice A. Number 9 is a verb question. And by the way, I don't have ahead of time some plan about how to diagnose these questions. I'm looking at them for the first time in a little while. Sometimes I've seen a few of these questions before. I've looked at this test a couple times, but the way I'm diagnosing this so quickly is I just look at the answer choices, right? So number 9, I'm looking at the answer choices. I see different verbs. Now, I don't know what's going to happen here, but I do want to say first that there's this tendency to notice that B, C, and D are different tenses. Has hired is in the past. Is hiring is sort of like a present tense thing, and so is hire, answer choice D. So there's a tendency to focus on that. 9 times out of 10, this is actually about singular versus plural. Let's see if we can notice this. Well, just to be clear what I mean, I'll use the phrase one thing. One thing hires. One thing has hired. One thing is hiring. Many things hire. My hypothesis, now, this is only going to work about 70% of the time, but based on that, I bet it's actually a singular plural thing, and I bet D is right. Large instrument manufacturers hire instrument technicians. So, such as Steinway, for example, is not the subject. That does not tell us what goes with hires or hire. In this case, it's D, hire, because the subject of the sentence is large instrument manufacturers hire instrument technicians. Anytime you're looking at a verb question, don't think that it's just the word right before, or in this case, right before the commas. There's a parenthetical phrase in the commas, for example. So a lot of people are going to say Steinway hires. Steinway has hired. Steinway is hiring. See, all three of those would work, and we'd have to go, which one is correct for the tense that we're talking about here? And all of those are wrong because the actual subject is at the beginning of the sentence. So a good rule of thumb: the subject of a sentence begins a clause. So it can't be Steinway because there's no commas before all the other stuff, right? If Steinway were the subject and that other stuff before Steinway was extra, there would be a comma, and then you would start the independent clause with the word Steinway. Steinway, parenthetical phrase, hires musicians or instrument technicians. Okay, let's move on. Number 10, the writer wants to add the following sentence to the paragraph. All right, sentence placement questions. Where are we going to place this sentence? We have to put it somewhere. Biggest thing to notice is what happens at each of the spots that are given as answer choices. That is, what are the words right before and after? Little words matter the most, I oftentimes say. So just to be clear, I'm noticing, for instance, that sentence 5 begins with the word he, right? Notice that he must be referring to Tom Weber in sentence 4, right? So the other words I'm paying attention to are words like she in sentence 7, of course. In each of those cases, we don't have the option to break up those anyways. But if I did, I would say, well, I'm not going to break those up because she is referring to Michelle, and I don't want to put this other sentence in between. That's a good rule of thumb to start with. Also, words like after, starting on sentence 6, that's a spot where we actually have to pay attention to. So let's notice what happens. I'm just going to jump in on answer choice C after sentence 5, which would be before sentence 6. And I'm just going to notice that word after at the beginning of sentence 6. So, he has never had an artist break a string on stage, he says. Other technicians own their own shops to serve their communities. After attaining her certification in piano tuning, she worked and then decided to start her own business. That makes sense. Look, because we have this first guy who's working for big acts like Van Halen and Reba McEntire, and then we have other technicians that start up their own shops, and that's exactly what Michelle Lamb does. I like that one. I'll look at the other ones. Now, look, we're not going to put it after 1. Large instrument technicians are needed in a variety of settings. Well, we haven't said the first setting yet, so we're not going to say other technicians, right? So that's why that's out. Let's think about after sentence 3 for a second. Some technicians get to work at concert venues and music festivals, and then we bring up the guy that does that, Tom Weber. We're not going to say others open up their own shops. Now, it would make sense to put it after 3 if sentence 4 didn't do what it does. Sentence 4 is an example of sentence 3. So don't break that up by listing yet another job for these technicians. Right? Just the big thing is not where does this sentence sound good. Think about it. It sounds good after 3, but not before 4, right? So when you think about sentence placement, you have to think about not just after 3, but after 3 implies breaking up 3 and 4, and we don't want to do that, right? So little words at the beginnings and ends of sentences matter a lot. Number 11 is back to some punctuation rules, and this is a good example of one for which I can get rid of 2 answers right away. B and C are exactly the same. B with a period and C with a semicolon. Those are the only differences between the two. And functionally, those are both the same. So we already said, in a previous example, that a semicolon goes between two full sentences, an independent clause, semicolon, independent clause. Period does the same thing, of course. Independent clause, period, independent clause. Just in case you haven't heard me mention this idea before, you want to know if something's a full sentence? Here's your hypothetical example. Hey, I've got to tell you something. What is it? Then spit out the sentence. Have you actually told them something? If you have, you've created a full sentence. In this case, I know that we don't have two full sentences, because if there were two full sentences in number 11, we would have two correct answers. There's no way that's the case. So I'll show you what I mean. I think as I'm looking, I think the first part is definitely not a full sentence. Hey, I've got to tell you something. You're like, what is it? I'm like, live performances, studio sessions, and the careers of individual musicians. You're like, what were you going to say about that? Right? So, not a full sentence. B and C are out. All rely on instrument technicians, all of which, so here's the thing, all of which, this word is part of a set of words that I call sentence wreckers. Sentence wreckers are words that begin with WH. So words like which, when, who, where. These are words that ask questions, oftentimes in a full sentence with a question mark at the end. But they don't work with statements that end with a period. So if you learn to recognize that, it becomes really easy. And we can try our same move here. The reason answer choice A works is that you could say that hey, I've got to tell you something. All of these things rely, or let me say it again. I'll read it as is so that you don't get confused. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Live performances, studio sessions, and the careers of individual musicians all rely on instrument technicians to keep instruments in top shape and the music playing on. I've told you something. Now, if you put a comma after musicians here, what you have is you're separating what would appear to be a dependent clause from an independent clause. Remember, subjects are the beginning of full sentences. So this comma is not part of a list anymore. The list ended with comma and the career of individual musicians. After that comma, what we're saying is this comma after musicians starts a full sentence. So, hey, I've got to tell you something. All of which rely on instrument technicians to keep equipment in top shape and the music playing on. So that's long and it's a little bit hard to say, but I think you maybe could tell that the word which is messing things up. If you say, hey, I've got to tell you something, all rely on technicians. I've told you something. You would have to know what I mean by all, but at least it's a statement. Hey, I've got to tell you something. All rely on musicians or instrument technicians. All rely on instrument technicians. Yes, full sentence. Hey, I've got to tell you something. All of which rely on instrument technicians. You're like, what? Right? So there's a difference there, and I think you can hear it. Use your intuition coupled with, not your intuition on its own, but your intuition coupled with a structural understanding of punctuation here. Okay, moving right along. Number 12, which choice best introduces the topic of the passage? Digital technology. Well, I mean, again, we saw one of these on the last passage. We're going to have to do some reading. In this case, even more broadly. I mean, the topic of the passage, it says remix, reuse, repurpose. Okay, so that's at least the title, which should tell us something about the topic. Oftentimes, the topic of the passage will be in the final sentence of the last paragraph. Or final sentence of the first paragraph. That's where a thesis usually lives. Especially when you see the word however. Right? The word however lets us know we're really getting to the stuff. You did a great job on the project. However, I need you to do better. The main idea is you need to do better. So in this case, remixing is a culturally valuable art form that often benefits the artist whose material is used, and its designation as copyright infringement warrants reconsideration. Remixing is a good thing. It's good for the original artist, and we should change the laws. We shouldn't make it illegal. So now I'm going to go back to number 12. Digital technology has expanded opportunities for creative expression, no matter the form of art. No matter the art form. Well, it seems like, as I read through the rest of this paragraph, it seems like we're talking about music. Parts of different songs, paste them together. Music genres, remix, mashup. So I think we're talking about music. So let's say D. That would be the best answer in this case. So the thesis wasn't of the utmost importance, but it was somewhat useful. And it turns out the lines right below ended up being more useful, which was kind of like what happened on number 1 as well. One other thing to just note is the colon. Now remember I said the colon can all that we need for a colon is a full sentence up front. So I'll try it again. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Digital technology has expanded opportunities for creative expression, no matter the art form, or especially in music. I've told you something. And in fact, this is the full sentence right here. This is not a full sentence, but taken as a whole, this whole part works as a full sentence. All right, 13 is a verb question. Let's see if we can notice the same game. So one thing, or I should say many things have spurred, one thing has spurred. Many things are spurring, many things were spurring. So if this is like the last one we did, it's not actually about tense most likely. It could be, some of them are, but if that's the case, the one that stands out is answer choice B. Let's see if that's the case. Who or what is something I'll oftentimes use here. Who or what have spurred or has spurred. The spread of software has spurred. Subject at the beginning of the sentence. If sometimes the verb refers to something in a subordinate clause, not to get too technical, but really the spread is the simplest thing that we can call the subject, and that's what has spurred. Notice all these prepositions of software that can be used to cut parts from different songs and paste them together. So all of that is descriptive information about what kind of a spread, or more specifically, what kind of a spread of software. So the spread or the spread of software has spurred. So that's like a superpower if you can use that on verb questions. 14, word choice again. None of these are informal, so this is probably the least important question, along with the other word choice question that we've seen so far. Opponents to this art form maintain that remix artists violate copyright law because they borrow material from protected works to the financial detriment. Yeah, that's the right word. To the disadvantage or detriment of. Wounding is slightly informal. These other words, sometimes I really want to help more in these cases, but there's really nothing we can say here that's going to help you on other questions. The difference between these, deterioration would mean we're taking away from, or sort of something that you already have is being removed. Now, that's not what's happening. It's removing potential for future gains. So we're not taking money directly from the pocket of the original artist. We're taking potential money from the original artist. Financial wounding, like I said, is informal. Financial limitation is just not quite right. So sorry, I wish I could help more on that. Let's see if 15. Now, one of these times it's going to actually be something other than singular plural. In this case, we have what I'm noticing that's slightly different about this verb question, number 15, is that arranging, to arrange, those are different structures. Those are like secondary verbs in sentences. He worked to arrange. The main verb in the sentence, he worked to arrange, would be worked. He worked hard arranging different things. Again, the main verb would be worked, and arranging would be secondary. So this is slightly different than the other ones we've seen. Let's take a look and see what works here. So using only a laptop, Gillis collects samples from songs ranging from rock ballads to hip hop. Cuts them. So first of all, this is a full sentence. Gillis is the subject. Using is a good example of an ing, not the main verb. Ranging, again, not the main verb. The main verb is collects. So what does he do? Gillis collects, cuts, and arranges. So we have a list here. Gillis collects something or stuff, cuts those things, and arranges those things. So we have a list of verbs that Gillis does. So this is a main verb in the sentence, one of three that connects directly to the subject Gillis. So to be clear what I mean, like using is referring to Gillis, but it's not part of the main clause of the sentence. Ranging is a verb referring to, usually a verb. INGs, the thing is, they can oftentimes function as nouns. They're kind of a strange construction when you try to analyze them. And the purpose of our lessons is not to get a perfect understanding of every technical nuance of grammar. It's to get questions right. So I'm going to speak a little bit informally here and say ranging refers to songs. Songs are ranging, right? So that's the way that INGs are functioning correctly in this sentence. The right answer, however, like I said, is the one that matches Gillis doing three things. Gillis collects, Gillis cuts, Gillis arranges. Okay, back to punctuation on number 16 here. So on number 16, Gillis believes his songs are original because they. Well, it's not a full sentence. You can get rid of B and D. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Well, maybe it's worth noticing that like all of this is not a full sentence before it. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Although his critically acclaimed 2006 album Night Ripper consists of hundreds of samples from different artists, you'd be waiting for me to tell you something, right? So that's not a full sentence. Gillis believes his songs are original. That could be a full sentence. But once you add because they, this is why I give you the heuristic or the sort of strategic way of, you can look up the word heuristic if you want. Essentially, it means like a strategy that you may not understand the full technical understanding of what makes a full sentence, but it'll be something that can help you. And that's what's really important here. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Gillis believes his songs are original. Cool, I told you something. Hey, I've got to tell you something. Gillis believes his songs are original because they. I keep doing this physical thing. I'm like, because I'm waiting, right? We're all waiting for what comes next. So the punctuation in answer choice B, the colon, and in D, the semicolon, neither are appropriate now. Then the question becomes, do we use the comma or not? And this is a very interesting point if you're interested in grammar or if you're just interested in getting a top score. Default, yes, we would use a comma. In this case, no. The right answer will be C. The reason the right answer will be C is because this quotation is not a sentence in and of itself. This quotation completes a sentence that has begun outside of the quotation. They recontextualize the source materials. So if we had Gillis believes his songs are original, comma, parentheses, they recontextualize the source material, that would be a full sentence. We would have a comma. Because recontextualize continues a sentence that begins with the word they, we will not use a comma. That's sometimes called mid-sentence quotations. So we're not breaking up the sentence. The same rule we would use in other situations. I haven't mentioned this yet today. Super useful. You never separate a subject and a verb with a single comma. You can separate a subject and a verb with two commas, in which case you have like some set of parentheses. The team, comma, or the team members, comma, believing they had the better roster, comma, thought they would win the game. The team thought they would win the game, subject, verb, two commas in between, perfectly cool. You're just never going to put one comma between a subject and a verb. In this case, they recontextualize is part of a subordinate clause, technically. However, still the same thing applies. The subject and verb, they recontextualized. Not the subject of the sentence, but the subject of this subordinate clause should not be separated by a single comma. Cool. All right, first thing I'm noticing on number 17 is like all these things seem to say the same thing. Legally permissible borrowing, legal and lawful use of legal acquisition through borrowing. I'm imagining, maybe not imagining, but I'm hypothesizing the word borrow may have already been used because it's in multiple answer choices in this way. Let's see. I mean, his music provides new ways of relating to the old. Listeners may revisit a song they had previously dismissed when they find themselves enjoying it mixed with a song that they love. So he believes his sampling qualifies as fair use, a legally permissible borrowing of copyrighted material. A legal and lawful use of legal acquisition through borrowing. Oof, hard. This is hard, folks. I think it's either A or B. Legal acquisition through borrowing is not going to be right. The legal and lawful use is like, that sounds like the way a lawyer would speak, which can be seemingly redundant but maybe important. Legally permissible borrowing of copyright materials for a transformative purpose. A legal and lawful use of copyrighted material for a transformative purpose. Valid means or acceptable. Look, D is definitely wrong. It's a little bit redundant. I think legal and lawful is going to be the right answer. But I think I'm going to go check. I don't know if I have the answers on this document or not. I do. Let's see. Sorry, I forgot which number I'm on. Sorry for the delay. Number 17. Let's see what 17 is. A. So they like the original. It's not the one that's a little bit redundant. I went against my better instincts here. Did a little studying for the LSAT recently and kind of liked B. I suppose the word legal and lawful is a little bit redundant. Acquisition. I don't know why acquisition is redundant. Let's see. It provides new ways of relating. Qualifies as fair use. The legally permissible borrowing of. So I think use is redundant in B. Acquisition, I guess, is incorrect in some way. I mean, like you're not. I don't know. I really don't like that. D is definitely wrong. Look, we can say this. We would probably avoid. Yeah, this is a really tricky question. I'm kind of surprised that they like A better than B, but they sure do. So my apologies for not being of more help on that question. However, I'm doing this on the fly here because I think it's important that you see the way I work through questions. And maybe I'll come back and amend this if I can think a little bit harder about it, but let's just move on for now. I don't like that. There's got to be something that I'm not seeing. He believes his sampling qualifies as fair use, legally permissible borrowing of copy. I mean, the use thing seems redundant in B, as well as legal and lawful seems redundant. Legal acquisition through borrowing, I just don't understand why that one's technically wrong, I guess. So we'll move on. Number 18, to improve the cohesion and flow of this paragraph, the writer wants to add the following sentence. Where should we put it? So we have another one of these. His songs. I'm going to pay attention to the his. Look, we've already described that he thinks that they're legal And we need to. This is like describing what his songs are, the way that they're constructed. Maybe earlier it makes sense. I think after 1, because that introduces the idea that his songs are composed entirely of samples, excerpts taken from one song for use in another. And then we get into the process by which he does that. So I think the fact that sentence 2 and 3 elaborate on this idea of the construction of his compositions would mean that we should put this more broad sentence before we get into those specifics. So for that reason, after 1. All right, 19. Which aspect of fair use most effectively sets up the next sentence of the paragraph? Okay. Well, what does the next sentence say? If using a sample hurts the sale of copyrighted work, then it does not qualify as fair use. For material to qualify as fair use, however, the borrower must not only transform the meaning of the original art, but also we're talking about in the following sentence, sale of copyrighted work. So that must be B. That's the only one that talks about the sale, economic value sale. All those other things might be true, but they're not supporting the next sentence. So on to 20. Let's see. Although it is important to protect. So INGs, don't add them unless they sound absolutely perfect to you. Don't add extra words. And in this case, to protect is a secondary verb after although it is important. So it is important. Is the primary verb in that subordinate clause. So to protect is a secondary verb. So is protecting, but I think your ear will tell you that to protect is better. Although it is important to protect artists by not allowing complete copies of their work to be distributed without permission. Yeah. 21. Remix art is not a mere verbatim copy, but a repurposing of source materials that makes... Okay, so we have the question of it or it's, there or there. To start with, on these questions, just notice which ones are related. So ITS without an apostrophe means possessive. IT apostrophe S, answer choice A, means it is. It is very related to answer choice D, they are. The only difference is singular or plural. They are, it is. Meanwhile, B is possessive and C is place. So ITS with no apostrophe is related to THEIR. Those both mean possessive. It's home, their home. But THERE is about place. So right away I'm thinking this question's probably those are too random. They don't have any relation to other answer choices. It's probably A or D. So let's just see if it's singular or plural now. And I could be wrong. It could be B or C, but it's probably A or D. Starting after this comma where the full sentence begins. Remix art is not a mere verbatim copy, but a repurposing of source materials that makes who or what's audience. The question is, and I think I know the answer now, but the question is it the audience of remix art or the source materials? And it's the remix art. Because the source materials don't have an audience in this situation. Of course they have an own audience. So for that reason, remix art is not a mere verbatim copy, but a repurposing of source materials that makes remix art's audience. For that reason, answer choice B. I'm a little bit shaken, so I'm going to just check real quick, but I think 21 is going to be B. Yeah, cool. Awesome. Worth checking. So let's look at 22. The writer wants a conclusion to restate the important idea of the passage. Look, the important idea of the passage is that remix art is not a bad thing, and it's good, and it should be rethought of as not copyright infringement. So look, it doesn't improve source material. That's arrogant. It renews interest in the original. That was part of the original idea. If we go back to the top here, it says up here that I thought I saw something here. Yeah, right here. Remixing is a culturally valuable art form that often benefits the artist whose material is used. Go back down. Renews interest in the original. Right? So we want to, again, remember that if they ask you a specific question, restate an important idea of the passage. Don't go with what sounds good. Go with one of the main ideas of the passage, probably from the first paragraph. Cool. Awesome. I'm going to take a little break and come right back to help you with the second half of this exam. Take care.